They say tree houses are where childhood memories live, but some memories never die. They wait and whisper and crawl back into your life from the dark. Tonight, Dreadscribe writes, again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. When I was 7, the tree behind our house was just a tree. Gnarled and massive, older than the house itself, it cast crooked shadows across the yard that danced like ink in the moonlight. My parents called it the Guardian because nothing ever grew beneath its roots, as if the earth there was claimed. But one night, lying awake with my window cracked open to the summer air, I heard it, a faint whisper curling through the dark like a breath. It said my name, not shouted, not called, whispered as if it had known me forever. I told myself it was the wind. Trees creak, branches sigh, and children's minds turn those sounds into stories. That's what my mother said when I told her the next morning. Still, I stopped playing near that tree. I stopped touching its bark or chasing the squirrels that nested in its hollow. Something about it felt too aware, too alive, as if beneath its rough exterior was a pulse waiting to be felt. And whenever the breeze shifted just right, I swore I heard that whisper again. My name, stretched and soft, like a secret only the tree and I shared. Years passed, and the fear dulled into curiosity. Childhood monsters often do. As an adult, nostalgia drew me back to that house, and with it, the idea to build a treehouse in those same twisted branches. Maybe I wanted to reclaim something I'd lost. The innocence, the mystery, the unanswered question that had haunted me for decades. The wood smelled like memory as I hammered it into place, and for the first time, I felt brave enough to climb higher than I ever had before. The whispers, I told myself, were just tricks of wind and bark. But the first night I spent in the finished treehouse, the wind was still. The air hung heavy and warm, and yet I heard it again. Not from below, but from inside the wood itself. My name clearer than ever, spoken not once but twice. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. The boards beneath my palms felt like skin, and the trunk behind my back felt like a heartbeat. I pressed my ear to the wood, and I swear I heard something moving inside, slow, deliberate, like something waking up. That's when the secrets began. It whispered things no one else could know. The scar beneath my knee from a fall I never told anyone about. The words I'd written in a diary I'd burned years ago. And it didn't just remember me, it remembered everything. The birds that had nested here, the storms that had split its branches, even the boy who once carved his initials into its bark and vanished weeks later. Its voice was ancient, older than the town, older than the soil itself. And with every secret it spoke, I felt myself sinking deeper into its story. But something had changed. The whispers no longer drifted like wind. They wrapped around me, closer, more insistent. And on the third night, as I tried to climb down, the ladder swayed on its own, and the wood beneath my feet groaned, not in protest, but in warning. That's when I realized it hadn't been calling me all these years. It had been waiting, and now that I was back, it had no intention of letting me go. I didn't sleep that night. The whispers crawled around the treehouse like ivy, seeping into every corner, soft but relentless. They spoke of memories that weren't mine, names I'd never heard, places I'd never been. It was as if the tree was trying to share its entire history with me, weaving me into a lineage that stretched back centuries. And then, somewhere between waking and dreaming, I heard something different. A question. Will you stay? It wasn't just a whisper now. It was inside my head, curling around my thoughts like roots seeking soil. When morning came, the world below looked different. My yard, the one I'd grown up in, it was there, but the angles felt wrong. The fence leaned in unfamiliar directions. The house's paint looked faded, older. Even the air smelled different, damp and metallic, like rain on stone. For a brief moment, I wondered if I'd dreamed the whole night. But then I saw the carvings. They weren't there before, spiraling patterns etched into the walls of the treehouse, pulsing faintly as if the sap itself was glowing beneath them. I traced one with my fingertip, and the whisper came again. Deeper. That's when I saw the hollow. It had always been there, a small knot in the trunk I'd ignored as a kid. But now it gaped wider, dark and inviting, a wound in the bark that breathed cold air. Against every instinct, I leaned closer. Inside, the darkness shifted. It wasn't empty. I saw faces, flickering like reflections on water, and among them, mine. Not as I was now, but as a child, standing barefoot at the base of the tree, looking up as if answering a call. My chest tightened. This wasn't a memory. It was a loop, repeating, pulling me towards something I couldn't understand. As night fell again, the wind returned, but it no longer sounded like wind. It was a chorus now, dozens of voices overlapping, some weeping, some laughing, all calling my name. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound came from beneath my skin, vibrating through bone. And then the tree moved, just slightly, a subtle shiver that rippled through the planks and branches. It wasn't rooted to the earth like I thought. It was stretching, shifting, like an animal waking from a long sleep. I tried to climb down, but the ladder was gone. In its place was smooth bark, unbroken and seamless, as if it had never been there. Panic surged through me. I kicked at the boards, screamed for help, but the forest around me was silent. Even the stars felt farther away. And then, in the hush that followed my cries, a final whisper slid into my mind. Not in a language I knew, but one I somehow understood. You came back. You belong. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of sap and soil. The wood beneath me softened, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat syncing with my own. My breath slowed. My limbs felt heavy. And as my vision blurred, I realized the truth. I hadn't built a treehouse into this tree. I had built myself into it. I wasn't its visitor. I was its offering. Years later, they say the tree still whispers on windless nights. They say if you press your ear to the bark, you can hear a voice calling a single name, mine. And those who answer never come back down. Some trees grow toward the sun, others grow toward memory, and some grow toward the souls that once dared to climb them. The treehouse had been empty for as long as I could remember. Its boards were gray and warped, half swallowed by the thick branches of the old oak that held it. Kids in the neighborhood used to dare each other to climb up there, but no one ever did. Not because it looked unsafe, though it did, but because of the stories. They said a boy disappeared there one summer night, and that his mother claimed she still saw a faint orange glow through the cracks of the wood. That was decades ago, and yet some nights when the fog rolled low, that same light still flickered inside. I'd seen it too. A thin pulse of amber weaving through the darkness like the heartbeat of something that refused to die. At first I convinced myself it was fireflies or the reflection of a street lamp. But there were no street lamps near that tree, and no one had been inside it for over 30 years. The curiosity gnawed at me until I could no longer ignore it. One cold evening, long after sunset, I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the creaking ladder. Each rung groaned under my weight like it was waking from a long sleep. The air inside felt colder than outside, heavy and unmoving, as if sealed away from the world for years. My flashlight beam swept across the small wooden room and stopped. The stories were wrong. The treehouse wasn't empty. The walls were covered in carvings, intricate spirals, jagged lines, and looping shapes that pulsed faintly under the light, like veins beneath skin. I reached out without thinking, brushing my fingers against one of the symbols. It was warm. Not like sun-warmed wood, but alive warm, like a breath against my palm. And beneath that warmth, a low hum thrummed through the wood, deep and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Then the light flickered again, not from my flashlight, but from somewhere deeper inside. I turned toward the corner where a small lantern hung from a splintered nail. It swayed gently, though the air was still. Its flame, if that's what it was, burned too steadily, too orange, casting long, unnatural shadows that crawled up the walls. I stepped closer, and the air shifted, a subtle but undeniable pressure settling against my chest. The floorboards beneath me let out a soft creak, but not from my weight. It was the sound of movement, slow, deliberate steps circling the small space. Yet when I turned, nothing was there. My flashlight flickered and died. The only light now came from the swaying lantern, and in its glow, the carvings on the walls changed. They weren't random shapes anymore. They formed eyes, hundreds of them, carved into the wood, each one angled toward me. And though I knew it was impossible, I could feel them watching. Something in the room knew I was there, heart hammering. But when I reached for it, my hand met only rough bark. The opening was gone. sealed by the same smooth pulsing wood that covered the walls. The whisper of steps returned, closer now, circling me like a predator unseen. And then, from somewhere deep inside the treehouse, a voice I couldn't understand murmured a single sound. Not a word, not a language, but something older, heavier. It was then I realized I hadn't come here to discover a secret. I'd answered a call. The sound deepened, rolling through the wooden walls like distant thunder trapped inside a coffin. I pressed my back against the corner, my breath shallow, my pulse sinking with that pulsing glow. The symbols carved into the wood weren't just markings. They were shifting, rearranging themselves into patterns that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. It felt like the treehouse itself was thinking, rearranging its thoughts right in front of me. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't. Something in those spirals tugged at me, pulling at a part of my mind I didn't know existed. The air grew warmer, thick with a strange scent. Not rot, not earth, but something metallic like rain striking rust. And then the whispers started. They weren't in English or any language I knew. They were older, heavier, layered voices speaking all at once, but perfectly clear. I couldn't understand the words, yet I felt their meaning seep into me. You came back. My knees weakened, a strange calm threading through the fear. I didn't remember ever being here before. Yet the carvings seemed to know me. The wood beneath my feet felt familiar. And the light, that steady amber heartbeat, flared brighter when I moved, as if responding to my presence. I crawled toward the lantern, desperate for answers, and froze when I noticed the floorboards. The grain of the wood wasn't just wood. It formed shapes, outlines of faces, twisted and silent, as though trapped beneath the surface. One face near the center had eyes that looked almost real. They stared up at me, not pleading, not angry, simply aware. I staggered back, knocking over the lantern. The flame didn't go out. It clung to the air, floating like liquid fire before reforming itself into a sphere of light. And then it split into 2, then 4, then dozens. Orbs that hovered above the floor, circling me like watchful embers. The treehouse groaned again. It wasn't settling. It was breathing. The boards rose and fell beneath me in slow rhythm, and the walls swelled outward like lungs filling with air. Something massive and alive was inside the tree, not in the wood, but part of it. And for the first time, I understood the carvings weren't decorations. They were restraints, cracks in a cage, and I had just touched the lock. A sharp crack split the air, and the center of the floor buckled. From the hollow beneath, a branch, no, an arm, began to emerge. Twisted and slick with sap, it reached upward, grasping blindly. More followed, clawing their way into the space as if eager to breathe. I scrambled to the sealed exit, pounding on the smooth bark until my fists ached, but the tree did not yield. The whispers swelled into a chorus, their words now unmistakable. Stay, stay, stay. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The air stilled. The whispers ceased. The floor hardened beneath my feet. The lantern light blinked out, plunging the treehouse into silence and darkness. My flashlight flickered weakly back to life, and to my disbelief, the hatch was open again, the rope ladder swaying gently in the night breeze. Trembling, I climbed down without looking back, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. I never told anyone what happened that night. But sometimes, on windless nights, I still see that faint orange glow flicker in the treehouse window. A steady, pulsing heartbeat in the dark. And though I never went back, I know it remembers me, because sometimes when I pass beneath its branches, I hear it again, a soft whisper curling through the air, calling my name. Some places aren't haunted by ghosts. They're haunted by memory, by hunger, by the things that wait in silence for someone curious enough to open the door. And I did. Every small town has a story it can't quite let go of, a ghost woven into its streets, whispered about in diner booths and around backyard fires. Ours was about a boy named Thomas Reed. In the summer of 1986, he climbed into his backyard treehouse and vanished. No one saw him leave, no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. One moment he was waving from the ladder, the next he was gone, swallowed, it seemed, by the wooden walls themselves. Decades later, his name was still carved into the bark of that tree like a scar the town couldn't heal. I grew up hearing the story from my grandfather, who lived across the street from the Reeds. He said the treehouse was abandoned after the disappearance, The family moved away. The yard grew wild and the wood rotted slowly in silence. Kids dared each other to climb it, but none ever stayed long. Some swore they heard scratching inside. Others claimed they saw a face peering from the slats, pale and watching. I always thought those were just stories meant to scare us. That was until last autumn, when the house finally went up for sale. And I bought it. I told myself it was just a piece of history, a forgotten property with a tragic past. But the first time I stepped into that overgrown backyard, I felt something watching from above. The treehouse was still there, half swallowed by ivy, leaning at a dangerous angle. Its wood was gray and splintered, the ladder missing half its rungs. Yet the moment I saw it, the world seemed to go still. The wind stopped. The birds quieted. Even the air felt heavier, as if holding its breath. It took me weeks to work up the courage, but one late afternoon, just before the sun slipped below the trees, I climbed up. The wood creaked beneath my weight, brittle but still holding. The small square room smelled of old sap and dust. Cobwebs draped from the beams like tattered curtains. I swept my flashlight across the floor and froze. There, half buried beneath a layer of leaves, was a small leather-bound journal. The initials TR were carved into the cover. I shouldn't have opened it, but curiosity always finds a way to override fear. Most of the pages were blank, brittle, and yellowed with age. But toward the back, new handwriting appeared, sharp, frantic, and unmistakably fresh. "It's still here," the first line read. "It won't let me leave." My pulse quickened. I turned the page. "Time doesn't work the same up here," the next entry said. "I've been watching for years. I know your name." My breath caught. My name was there, written in careful letters, as if etched by someone who'd been waiting for me. My hands trembled as I flipped to the next page, but before I could read more, the floor beneath me shifted. A low creak echoed through the treehouse, followed by another. Closer this time, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the far corner, where nothing had been a moment ago. I turned, flashlight shaking, but the beam caught only empty air. Still, the steps continued, circling closer. And in that moment I understood the stories weren't just stories. Something else was up here, as it began, leaving only the strained rasp of my breathing echoing in the cramped space. My flashlight beam trembled across the walls, revealing the carvings I hadn't noticed before. Hundreds of small, jagged scratches gouged into the wood. Some formed letters, others crude shapes of hands, faces, eyes. It felt like the walls themselves had been trying to speak. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I crouched to examine one closer. It was a name, Thomas, then another. Thomas Reed, then impossibly me. My full name, etched as if by fingernails over and over again. I backed away, pulse pounding. That's when the temperature dropped. It wasn't just a chill. It was as if the air had been hollowed out. My breath fogged in the dying light as a faint hum filled the silence, low and distant like a tune hummed underwater. The floorboards groaned again, and I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner, a shadow darker than the darkness around it. It shifted when I shifted, not like a trick of light, but like something aware. My rational mind scrambled for explanations: wind, settling wood, animals. But none fit the weight of what I felt pressing in around me. I turned back to the journal, as if it might anchor me to something real. The next line chilled me more than the cold ever could. It's not a place. It's a door. My eyes darted around the treehouse, and suddenly the carvings made a horrifying kind of sense. They weren't random scratches. They were marks of someone trying to claw their way out. The air grew thicker, almost syrupy, and a faint whisper brushed past my ear. Not from outside, but from within the wood itself. My name again, softer this time, drawn out, like a lullaby. I stumbled toward the ladder, desperate to get out, but when I looked down, the ground seemed impossibly far. The backyard, my backyard, was shrouded in mist, shapes shifting within it like silhouettes beneath deep water. My pulse spiked. This wasn't the same world I'd climbed up from. And when I turned back, the journal lay open to a page I hadn't seen before. The handwriting was frantic now. It needs another name. Another story to keep. Don't answer it. The whisper grew louder, insistent now, weaving through the air with sickening familiarity. It used my father's voice, then my childhood friends, then someone I hadn't heard since I was a kid. Thomas. "Stay," it said. "We're all here. Stay." My knees weakened. A part of me wanted to listen, to believe that maybe he was here, that maybe I wasn't alone. But another part screamed that none of this was real. Or worse, that it was too real to understand. I forced myself onto the ladder, but as my foot touched the first rung, the entire structure shuddered. Not from wind, from something moving inside the tree. The bark rippled beneath my hand like skin. The whispers turned to pleading now, then to laughter, high, brittle, and childlike. "You came back," it giggled. "We've been waiting." The carvings glowed faintly in the dark, and for a moment I saw faces, dozens of them, staring from the wood. I jumped the last few feet, landing hard on the ground. The mist broke apart like smoke, and the backyard returned to normal. No glow, no whispers, just the dead, leaning treehouse swaying slightly in the breeze. But when I turned to leave, something slipped from my pocket. The journal. Only now the final page was different. The last line read, "You left too soon, but the story isn't over." I moved out of that house a week later, but the story still follows me. Sometimes, on windless nights, I hear my name whispered from the trees behind my new home. And last month, a neighborhood kid told me about a strange light glowing in the branches. They say someone's up there, writing a new story, and deep down, I know it's waiting for me to come back. Some stories don't end because they were never meant to. They just wait, patient and hungry, for someone new to climb the ladder. I hadn't climbed that tree in over a decade. It was one of those relics of childhood you stop thinking about as the years pass. A crooked little treehouse built with splintered wood, rusty nails, and too much imagination. It had been empty for as long as I could remember, left to the wind and the seasons. That's why I froze the night I stepped into my backyard and saw it. A thick rope ladder hanging down from the trapdoor, swaying gently in the dark. At first, I told myself it had to be a prank. Kids from the neighborhood sneaking into my yard, maybe trying to scare the old guy who'd moved back into his childhood home. But the longer I stared, the less that explanation fit. The rope wasn't new, but it wasn't mine either. Darker, heavier, the kind used for climbing gear, not the flimsy one I'd tied as a kid. And then I noticed the prints. Muddy handprints smeared across the trunk, each one spaced too far apart for a child. Whoever had climbed that tree wasn't small, and they hadn't been careful. My heart thudded against my ribs as I stood there, weighing every reason not to climb it. But curiosity, that same dangerous thread that had gotten me in trouble 100 times as a kid, pulled me upward. The rope was damp and cold under my hands, leaving streaks of grime on my palms. As I climbed, the night pressed closer, heavy and watchful. Every creak of the old wood sounded sharper, louder, like the tree itself was holding its breath. The trapdoor groaned as I pushed it open, and for a moment I just listened, half expecting someone to shuffle inside. But there was only silence. Then I pulled myself in and froze. It wasn't the treehouse I remembered. The floorboards were cleared of leaves and dirt. The walls, once plastered with my childish drawings and comic book cutouts, were bare. In the corner, a faded blanket lay neatly folded, and beside it, a dent in the floorboards that could only come from someone sitting there. Often, the air smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth. It wasn't the smell of a place abandoned. It was the smell of someone. My pulse quickened as my flashlight's beam swept the small space. That's when I saw the Polaroids. They were pinned in a crooked line along the far wall. Not from decades ago, these were recent. My backyard taken from above, my back porch, my bedroom window, curtains drawn but a faint silhouette visible inside. And then the last one, me, asleep in my bed, mouth slightly open, the glow of the alarm clock reading 2:47 a.m. The blood drained from my face. Whoever had been up here hadn't just been watching. They had been inside. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe an old friend messing with me, maybe someone from the neighborhood, but none of them explained the most chilling part. I lived alone, and no one but me had a key. The rope ladder creaked suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts. It swayed slightly in the night breeze, except there was no breeze. The trees around me were still, the leaves motionless. Something or someone had shifted its weight below. My breath caught as I crouched, straining to hear. A faint scrape of rope against bark. Then silence. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to bolt out of that treehouse and never look back. But something deeper, colder, kept me frozen. If someone was still up here, they hadn't gone far. And if they were watching me, they already knew I'd found the photos. The rope ladder shifted again just once, and in that tiny, deliberate motion, I understood something that made my blood run cold. Whoever had been living in my treehouse wasn't finished, and they were still here. I didn't move for what felt like hours. My breath was shallow, my knees stiff from crouching, and my flashlight's narrow beam trembled slightly in my grip. Every fiber of me screamed to climb down and run, yet some part of me, the part that needed to know, kept me rooted to the floorboards. Whoever was out there had already been inside my life, my home, my sleep. Running now wouldn't undo that. And maybe, a desperate part of me thought, if I stayed quiet enough, they'd reveal themselves. But the silence that followed was worse than footsteps. It was deliberate, suffocating, the kind that fills the space between predator and prey. Finally, I forced myself to crawl toward the trapdoor, angling my flashlight downward. The rope ladder dangled still and empty, no figure waiting below. Yet that didn't reassure me. It only meant they were somewhere I couldn't see. I lowered myself onto the first rung cautiously, the rough rope biting into my palms. Halfway down, I glanced over my shoulder toward the tree line. That's when I saw it, a faint glint of something metallic tucked between the leaves. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, but I knew what I'd seen. A lens. Someone was watching from the darkness. I dropped the last few feet and landed hard on the ground, the flashlight beam skittering across the grass. My eyes darted to the shadows beneath the fence line, the dense shrubs, the narrow alley between my house and the neighbor's shed. Nothing moved. Yet the primal animal part of my brain knew I wasn't alone. Something was out there, watching, waiting. I bolted for the house, fumbling with my keys and slamming the back door shut behind me. Every light in the kitchen blazed on as I pressed my back to the door, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No creak of wood. No sound of someone climbing down after me. Just the steady thud of my heart and the low hum of the refrigerator. I sat by the window overlooking the yard, flashlight beside me, staring at the treehouse. It was just a dark silhouette now, its trapdoor closed, the rope ladder swaying gently like a noose in the breeze. My mind replayed every image from those Polaroids, every detail of that space rearranged by unseen hands. Whoever had been there knew me intimately, not just where I slept, but how I moved, what angle my curtains fell, the exact hour my breath slowed into dreams. By dawn, exhaustion pulled me into a restless half-sleep. When I woke, sunlight poured into the room, and the rope ladder was gone. Not cut, not dropped. Gone, as if it had never been there at all. I searched the yard, the base of the tree, even the surrounding bushes. No footprints, no stray fibers, no evidence that anyone had been there. But when I climbed into the treehouse once more, the Polaroids were still pinned neatly to the wall, and there was a new one among them. It was a picture of me, standing at my kitchen window last night, flashlight in hand, staring into the darkness. The timestamp in the corner read 3:04 a.m. I stumbled back, my skin crawling as the truth began to take shape. Whoever had been here wasn't hiding from me. They were letting me know they were still close. Close enough to step into my yard, to climb my tree, to photograph me while I watched for them. Weeks have passed since then. The rope ladder has never returned, and I haven't seen a figure near the treehouse again. But sometimes, late at night, I catch the faintest glimmer of light where the branches sway, like a lantern's glow tucked behind the wood. And every morning, before the sun fully rises, I check my windowsill and my mailbox for new Polaroids. I haven't found another yet. But deep down, I know it's only a matter of time, because whoever climbed into that treehouse once isn't gone. They're patient, they're watching, and they're waiting for the moment I let my guard down again. And next time, I fear they won't just take pictures. I was 12 when we hammered the nail into the tree. It was a game back then. Sealing up the hollow knot we'd found in the trunk, pretending it was a portal to another world. My father laughed as he tapped the final blow, and we both stepped back to admire the treehouse perched above it like a crown. "There," he'd said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Whatever's in there stays in there." It was meant as a joke, but I remember the way the wind shifted then, as if the branches had sighed in agreement. Decades passed, and the treehouse became a relic of childhood summers. My father was gone by then, the laughter of those afternoons echoing only in memory. Still, I visited the tree sometimes, brushing moss from the planks, gripping the rope ladder just to feel the texture of something that hadn't changed while everything else had. That's why I noticed the crack first. A thin, jagged split running through the knot we'd sealed so many years ago. It wasn't from weather or decay. It looked pushed, as if something inside was pressing outward. At first I dismissed it. Trees shift. Wood swells. Nature has its ways of undoing what humans impose. But then came the sound. A faint, rhythmic scraping that echoed through the trunk like breath drawn through a throat. It wasn't constant, only at dusk when the last light filtered through the leaves. I would stand beneath the branches, heart quickening, and tell myself it was just the wind. But the wind doesn't sound like fingernails dragging along wood. 2 weeks later, the crack had widened into a gash. Sap bled from it in thick, dark beads, streaking the bark like tears. I pressed my ear against the trunk one night and felt something shift deep inside, slow, deliberate, alive. That was when I knew this was no ordinary hollow. Trees, after all, can live centuries. They witness, absorb, and remember. What if they also harbor? What if what we sealed inside all those years ago wasn't empty space at all? I told myself I wouldn't climb up, that I would leave it alone. But curiosity has a way of outweighing fear, and one evening, beneath a sky bruised purple with storm clouds, I ascended the rope ladder. The treehouse groaned under my weight, boards creaking like an old man waking from a long sleep. And there it was, the knot we'd sealed, now ruptured wide open, the wood curled outward like lips parting in a gasp. The hollow was deeper than I remembered, impossibly so. My flashlight beam vanished into its darkness without finding an end. A damp, earthy smell seeped out, mixed with something older, metallic, almost like blood. And then it moved. Something inside shifted, sending a shudder through the trunk beneath my feet. The wood flexed as if exhaling, and a slick, sinewy shape slid forward, not climbing, not crawling, but emerging, like a memory clawing its way back into the present. I stumbled back, but the movement didn't stop. It was slow, patient, deliberate, as if whatever had waited beneath that bark for decades was in no rush now. The branches above rustled without wind, and the air grew colder. Somewhere deep within the hollow, something whispered. Faint, wet syllables that almost sounded like my name. And then I saw it. A thin, black appendage, slick as oil and jointed like an insect's leg, curling over the edge of the hollow and gripping the wood. Another followed. Then another. I should have run, but I couldn't move. Because with every inch it climbed, I realized something far more terrifying than the thing itself. The hollow wasn't just inside the tree anymore. It was spreading, expanding, like the tree had been nothing but a shell, and what was inside was finally ready to step out. The first drop of sap hit the floor beside me, dark and warm against the old wood. But it wasn't sap anymore. It was something else, something alive, and it was still coming. I scrambled toward the edge of the treehouse, every instinct screaming to climb down, but the ladder swayed violently beneath me as if something below had grabbed it. The branches around me trembled without wind, their leaves rattling like distant bones. That hollow sound behind me deepened, a wet, pulsing groan, almost like the tree itself was breathing. And with each exhale, the black limbs pushed farther into the open air, unfolding with insect-like precision. I'd always thought of trees as silent witnesses, passive giants who only grew and aged. But now, watching the bark ripple and stretch like skin, I understood how little we really know about what lives inside them. The hollow gaped wider, jagged like a wound forced open, and something inside was writhing, pressing forward with the slow certainty of something that had waited far too long. Then came the smell, metallic and sharp like old coins soaked in rainwater. It clung to the back of my throat and made me gag. The appendages kept coming. They weren't roots and they weren't branches. They bent and coiled with unnatural grace, tipped with fine, hook-like claws that dug into the wood. And as they spread, I noticed something worse. Faint etchings burned into the bark beneath them. At first I thought they were cracks, but then I saw patterns, spirals, symbols. They matched the childish carvings my father and I had scratched into the tree decades ago. Only now, they pulsed faintly with an inner glow, as if the tree had absorbed them, feeding on the memory of our hands. That's when I realized the whispers had grown louder. They weren't single words anymore, but layered murmurs, overlapping like overlapping radio signals. My name, yes, but other names too, ones I didn't recognize. The sound curled around my mind like smoke, threading itself into thoughts I hadn't meant to have. And beneath it all, a steady rhythmic phrase repeated over and over. You sealed it in. You woke it up. The ladder jerked again, harder this time. Something was climbing up. I forced myself toward it, intending to kick it loose and leap if I had to, but the sight froze me cold. Two of the black limbs, slick and shining like wet roots, were wrapped tightly around the rope, pulling it upward. And beneath them, in the dim light below, a shape clung to the trunk. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't even something I could name. It looked like the tree had grown eyes. Not two, but dozens embedded in the bark, all fixed on me. And as they blinked, the whispers stopped. Then, in that awful silence, a single voice, low, guttural, patient, spoke directly into my ear, though nothing was near me. You built the door. Now open it. The floorboards beneath my feet buckled slightly, sagging inward. I looked down and saw that the wood wasn't wood anymore. It was soft, pulsing faintly, expanding and contracting like a living lung. A crack split open between the planks, and from it, something pushed. A shape like a hand, but stretched and too thin, slick with the same dark sap. It reached for me slowly, deliberately, curling its fingers in invitation. I don't remember making the decision to move. 1 second I was frozen, and the next, I was scrambling down the ladder, half falling, half sliding, branches whipping against my face. When I hit the ground, I didn't stop running. Not through the yard, not past the fence, not even when my legs burned and my lungs screamed. I didn't look back until I was inside the house with the door bolted and the curtains drawn. But from my window that night, I could still see the treehouse. A faint glow pulsed within the hollow, rhythmic, alive. And the rope ladder, it was gone. Whatever crawled out didn't need it anymore. Weeks have passed, and I haven't gone back. But every morning, when I step onto the porch, there's fresh sap pooled at the base of the tree, dark as blood and warm to the touch. And some nights, when the wind is still, I swear I hear my father's voice calling from the tree that summer. But maybe the truth is darker. Maybe the tree sealed us out. And maybe what crawled free wasn't a monster at all, but something we had buried in wood and memory, something that never forgot the sound of our hands. The first night I heard them, I thought I was dreaming. A faint creak, then another, as if weight was shifting on old wood. It was 3:12 a.m., a time I wouldn't have noticed if it hadn't become a ritual. Every night after that, the same sound returned at the same minute, soft but deliberate, footsteps climbing into the treehouse just beyond my bedroom window. At first I dismissed it as an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat, but the steps were too measured, too heavy, too intentional to belong to anything with paws. And when I peered through the glass, holding my breath, I saw the trap door at the base of the platform swinging gently, open, then closed, as if someone had just gone inside. It wasn't the treehouse itself that unsettled me. I'd built it with my father when I was 10, hammering crooked nails into sun-warmed planks and carving our initials into the railing. It had been a refuge back then, a place of whispered secrets and childish imagination. Now it was a husk, weathered by rain and time, forgotten until those footsteps began. Something about them felt wrong. Predatory even, like the patient circling of something that knew it was already inside my world. On the third night, I decided I had to see. I left my window cracked open and sat awake in the dark, every muscle tight, watching the treehouse. The minutes crawled by like wounded insects, slow and agonizing. At 3:11, the wind died. The night grew still, unnaturally still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Then creak, one footstep, another. My pulse spiked. I pushed the curtain aside just enough to see the trapdoor swing upward again. But there was no shape, no silhouette, no hint of anything climbing. The steps had a weight, but the air above them was empty. The next morning I told myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion had conjured phantoms in the dark. But the wood beneath the trapdoor told a different story. Fresh indentations marred the weathered boards, deep enough to have been left by boots or something heavier. And then I saw them. Faint marks along the railing, shallow scratches forming crude shapes, letters, names. I climbed up with the sunlight still golden and weak, half expecting to find more damage. Instead, I found the carvings, dozens of them, etched deep into the wood along the interior walls. Each was a name followed by a date. Most were old, decades old, and none I recognized. It looked almost like a ledger, a roll call of forgotten people, each tied to a moment in time. But it was the final one that froze me. It was my name, perfectly spelled, and beneath it, tomorrow's date. The air in the treehouse shifted then. Colder, heavier, like the atmosphere before a storm breaks. My skin prickled and every instinct screamed for me to get down. As I turned, I caught a faint movement in the corner of my eye. The trapdoor was swaying again, just barely, though there was no wind. The steps were silent this time, but I felt them. A vibration in the planks, a subtle tremor beneath my feet, as if something had just arrived and was standing right behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't. My breath caught in my throat and the temperature seemed to plummet with every heartbeat. It was as though the treehouse was inhaling, drawing me deeper into its hollow chest. And then, just before I climbed down, I heard it, a faint, almost playful scratching against the wall behind me, carving new lines into the wood. I didn't stay to see what name was being written next. But that night, when the clock struck 3:12 again, the footsteps didn't stop at the treehouse. They kept going, slow, deliberate, one after another, until they were just beneath my bedroom window. And this time, something knocked. I didn't open the window. I couldn't. I just sat there staring at the darkness below, my breath shallow and ragged as the knocking continued. 3 soft taps, a pause, then 2 more. It was rhythmic, almost patient, like someone who knew I was awake and waiting for me to respond. I told myself not to move, not to even blink. Eventually, the sound stopped. Silence settled over the yard once more, but it wasn't comforting. It was the silence of something that hadn't left, only shifted its attention elsewhere. Sleep was impossible after that. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every rustle of branches set my heart hammering. I kept glancing at the clock, watching each minute crawl toward dawn. When sunlight finally spilled through my curtains, I convinced myself it had all been a nightmare, a bad dream fueled by paranoia and too much coffee. But when I stepped outside, the dew-soaked grass beneath my window told another story. A trail of prints led from the base of the tree to the siding of my house. They weren't human. Too long, too narrow, with claw-like indentations where toes should have been. Whatever had been climbing into that treehouse had come much closer. I should have left it alone. Any rational person would have. But there's a cruel logic to fear. The more it grips you, the more you crave understanding, as if knowing what's hunting you could save you from its teeth. So that night, I did something reckless. I stayed awake again, but this time I crept outside before 3:12, hiding beneath the shadow of the tree and waiting. The wind was cool and damp against my face, carrying the faint hum of cicadas. At first, nothing happened. Then the air grew heavy, charged like the seconds before lightning splits the sky. The footsteps began. Not above, but around me, circling the tree in a slow, deliberate path. I squinted into the dark, trying to see shapes among the branches, but there was nothing there. Yet the ladder moved, swaying as if hands gripped it. The trapdoor opened with a soft groan and the sound of wood shifting followed. My chest tightened as I climbed after it, rung by rung, trying to move as quietly as whatever was inside. The treehouse was empty, or at least it appeared to be. But the air was wrong, thick, breathing. I turned toward the carvings and my heart lurched. My name was still there, but no longer alone. Beneath it were more words, freshly etched into the wood in uneven strokes. "We've chosen." The letters looked wet, almost pulsing, as if the tree itself had bled them into existence. And then, from somewhere deep inside the walls, came a sound that didn't belong. A low, wet dragging, like something crawling through the grain. The boards beneath my feet trembled. A split formed along one of the planks, narrow at first, then widening as though something was pressing from below. My breath caught. Something was inside the treehouse, beneath the floor, pushing its way up. The hatch behind me slammed shut, and the air turned ice cold. And then I heard it. A whisper, low and rasping, curling against my ear, though nothing stood beside me. "Tomorrow, I don't remember climbing down." I don't remember running inside. I only remember locking every door and window and sitting awake until morning, heart racing, eyes fixed on the treehouse. When the sun rose, everything looked ordinary again. No claw marks, no new carvings, just the rope ladder swaying gently in the wind, as if mocking me. I moved out a week later. I told myself I was done with that house, done with the whispers and the carvings and the nightmares. But last night, as I drove through a new neighborhood miles away, I passed a backyard with an old treehouse perched in its branches. And dangling from it, swaying softly in the breeze, was a rope ladder, one I knew I hadn't built. And at 3:12 a.m., something knocked on my window again. Some visitors don't come to see you once. They come back until you answer. Tonight, that I questioned my own memory. One morning, while drinking coffee by the kitchen window, I glanced out at the backyard and felt something was off. The treehouse, the one my father built decades ago, the one that had never shifted an inch, seemed closer. Not by much, just a few feet. Maybe I was misremembering. Maybe the angle of the sunlight or the way the grass grew beneath it was playing tricks on my eyes. I laughed it off. But the next morning, it was closer again. It wasn't the sort of thing you could measure in obvious leaps. It crept forward like a secret, inch by inch, as if hoping I wouldn't notice. I tried to convince myself the tree was growing, leaning, responding to time and weather. Trees moved after all, roots shifted, trunks twisted. But this was different. The treehouse itself, the wooden planks and rusted nails, seemed to have advanced toward my house, as if the ground beneath it had tilted just for that purpose. And beneath it the grass was darker, richer, like something had been feeding there. At night I began to dream of it. I'd wake to the sound of wood groaning in the dark, deep and aching, like the sigh of an old ship shifting in water. Sometimes I'd swear I heard something dragging, a scraping beneath the window that made the hairs on my neck rise. Yet each time I forced myself to look, the backyard would be still, the treehouse motionless and innocent beneath the pale wash of the moon. But even from there, I could feel its presence pressing closer, like a slow breath against the glass. Curiosity eventually outweighed denial. One afternoon I hammered a metal stake into the ground exactly 5 feet from the treehouse ladder. By dawn, the stake was buried beneath the platform's shadow. That was when I stopped telling myself it was my imagination. Something was moving it, something deliberate. And yet, how could a structure bolted into a tree simply move? Unless the tree itself wasn't as still as it seemed. I started paying closer attention to the shadows beneath the branches. They weren't right. They curled and recoiled in ways that didn't match the wind, as if stretching and testing their reach. And sometimes, when I stared too long, I'd catch a glimpse of something else, something within them. Shapes that felt more like fingers than branches, curling slow and patient around the trunk. The idea was absurd, and yet the evidence was undeniable. The tree wasn't just alive, it was aware. One night, determined to catch whatever was happening, I set an alarm for 2 a.m. and planted myself by the window. At first, the yard was silent, blanketed in that eerie hush that only comes when the world is asleep. Then I heard it, a groan, deep and resonant, rising from the earth like the planet itself had exhaled. The tree shuddered. The planks creaked, and before my eyes, the treehouse shifted. Not much, just an inch or two, but enough to steal the air from my lungs. It wasn't the slow growth of wood responding to wind. It was movement, intentional, purposeful. The trunk twisted like muscle, pulling the heavy structure forward while the roots beneath it wriggled deeper into the ground, anchoring the advance. I stared, frozen, as the entire mass dragged itself closer to the house, toward me. By dawn, it had closed the distance by nearly 3 feet. And as sunlight burned away the night's illusions, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The branches closest to my window weren't just brushing against the glass. They were reaching, and for the first time, I realized it wasn't simply moving. It was hunting. I barricaded the window with furniture, pretending wood and glass could outthink roots. Daylight gave me courage. I measured the distance in chalk along the patio stones. By noon, the treehouse was still. By dusk, the chalk marks looked closer. When darkness fell, the yard exhaled cellar-cold breath, and the groan returned, patient as tide. I killed every light and watched from the bedroom. The silhouette leaned toward me, a black geometry against the moon. Movement came in pulses, a grip, a drag, a settling. Leaves shivered without wind. Nails squealed as planks shifted. With every lurch, shadows under the platform uncurled and flowed forward, as if gravity had been rerouted toward the house. I muttered reasons, subsidence, a storm-felled root, parallax. Then the nearest branch bent like an elbow. Its tip tapped the glass once, twice, like a doctor finding a pulse. Another slid along the siding, searching seams the way a tongue finds a broken tooth. The house creaked in answer, timbers complaining like old bones. I remembered my father's warning the summer we built it: never nail into living wood without asking. He laughed, then touched the trunk anyway, a quick apology. Had we fed it for years, birthday laughter, secret oaths, August heat, until it learned the shape of us, the way a predator learns a gait. What if it wasn't moving toward the window, but reaching for what it believed was missing? At 3:17, the glass fogged from a breath that wasn't mine. The branch pressed harder, twigs splaying like fingers. The latch popped. Instinct overruled awe. I grabbed the hatchet and cracked the window. Cold air poured in, sap sweet and rot sour. I swung. The first strike cut leaves. The second bit bark. The branch recoiled with a swallowed gasp. For a beat, everything went still. Then the tree answered. The trunk twisted. The platform yawed. Nails snapped like brittle teeth. The ladder scraped upward, hooking the sill. Shadows rushed the foundation like floodwater, patient and inevitable. I backed into the hallway, hatchet raised, heart a frantic metronome. Drywall ticked. A crack spidered toward the floor like lightning seeking ground. I almost ran. Instead, I opened the front door and spoke to it, not to boards or rope or hungry dark, but to the living core. I said what my father never voiced. I'm sorry. I will take it down. I will give you back what we borrowed. The night held its breath. The branch lifted from the glass. The platform settled. Far below, roots unknotted with a slow, wet sigh, retreating like a tide reversing mid-moon. By sunrise, the treehouse stood where it had been weeks ago, farther than memory, nearer than regret. I spent the day dismantling it plank by plank, hands blistered, throat raw, until only the scarred trunk remained, banded by nail holes like rings of history. That night I slept with the window open, listening for groans that never came, and counted the breaths between crickets until dawn, uncertain whether I'd bargained with a forest or only with my own guilt and hunger. Some structures move toward us because we trespassed first. Some hungers are taught, and sometimes an apology, offered before the last plank falls, is the only fence strong enough to keep the woods outside, and the person inside. I never believed the stories about Miller's Grove. Kids at school whispered that the old treehouse deep in the clearing could talk, not like a ghost or a monster, but like the wood itself had a voice. They said if you stayed too long inside, it would start whispering secrets you were never meant to know. I laughed it off for years. But the night I decided to prove them wrong, I brought a flashlight, a blanket, and a stubborn certainty that I'd come back with nothing but silence. The treehouse was older than anyone remembered. Its boards were weathered gray, soft as bone beneath my palms, and the rope ladder creaked under my weight as if protesting every rung. Inside, it smelled of damp earth and resin, a scent like rain soaked into old paper. There were carvings etched into the walls, names, dates, some words I couldn't read, almost like prayers. It was smaller than I remembered from childhood stories, but in the moonlight leaking through the cracks, it felt alive, like I was stepping into the ribcage of something ancient. Hours passed. My flashlight died, but I didn't care. The night air was cool and the forest hummed softly around me. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, the world was different, quieter, denser, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I heard it, my name. Not shouted, not spoken, but whispered, like wind threading through leaves. It came from beneath me, from the floor itself. I froze, waiting for the sound again, telling myself it was just the wood settling. But then it spoke again, clearer this time, a single drawn-out syllable of my name, wrapped in something almost tender. It wasn't just saying my name, it was speaking to me. I pressed my ear to the floorboards. The voice was faint but deliberate, threading through the grain like water through stone. And then it began to talk. It spoke of things I hadn't told anyone. The scar on my knee from when I was 6, the lie I told my mother about where I'd been last summer, the name I had given a dead bird I buried behind our garage when I was 9. Each word slipped under my skin, intimate and invasive, like someone rifling through the drawers of my mind. I told myself it was impossible, that no one could know those things. But then the voice whispered something I had never said aloud to anyone, not even to myself. something I had spent years trying to forget. And that's when the fear set in. Because whatever was beneath those boards wasn't just in the treehouse. It knew me. I wanted to leave, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if the wood had grown heavy around me, the air too thick to breathe. The whisper grew closer, richer, until it felt as though it was pressed against my ear. And when I laid my palm flat against the floor, the wood was warm, pulsing gently, like a heartbeat. Then something shifted beneath my hand. The plank beneath me trembled. Once, twice, and then something slowly, with trembling fingers, I pried at the edge of one loose board, expecting to see soil or roots beneath. But when the plank lifted free, I didn't see dirt at all. I saw an eye staring back at me. For a heartbeat, I mistook the eye for glass, a lost marble in the joists. Then it dilated. A wet sheen slid across it like a blink. I recoiled as a resin-sour breath rose from below. The eye didn't flinch. It watched, and I knew it wasn't looking up so much as looking in. The whisper swelled to a murmur, tuned like a radio snapping into focus. It threaded my name through memories that weren't quite mine, boots by a stove I've never owned, a lullaby in a stranger's alto, a candle guttering in a room I couldn't place. But what they didn't expect, it breathed, was that trees remember for those who forget. The floor pulsed under my knees, slow as a sleeping animal. I should have fled. Instead, I asked, "What are you?" The answer arrived as sensation. Rings counting years, sap like tide, lightning stitched into grain, roots prying stone. The gap widened with a soft crack, and a second eye rolled into view. Amber-faceted fossils of storms inside. It wasn't a creature under the treehouse. It was the tree itself, an organ open to see. Lantern glow picked out the carved names around the walls. They weren't graffiti. They were records, people who'd stayed long enough to be known. My fingertips found my own, etched shallowly, as if the wood had rehearsed first. The voice gentled. It named the thing I'd buried and refused to mourn, the apology I'd dodged, the grief I'd boarded over like a cracked window. Each sentence fit too cleanly, like a key trying locks. Warmth climbed my wrists. In the gloss of that eye, I saw myself small and tired, a person of unfinished sentences. "Stay," it coaxed, tender as a hand on a brow. "Let me hold what hurts." The invitation rose like a tide. I pictured lying down, letting wood close over me like a lid, letting the tree keep my memories the way it keeps lightning. A spark of clarity cut through. I pictured the other names, the missing dates, the way a story can preserve you so completely you stop being yourself. I set the plank across the opening like a shield and spoke. Not a spell or threat, only a boundary I had never drawn. "You can keep the story," I said. "But you can't keep me." Silence pressed in. Then the eye narrowed. Not angry, more disappointed, like a parent weighing a child who chose a different road. The boards cooled. The breath withdrew. The floor settled from pulse back to wood. I slid the plank into place and edged toward the hatch. The voice followed once, softer now, the way a hymn follows you out of a church. "Take the part you need," it said. Outside, the grove lifted from black to bruised blue. I climbed down with shaking arms and didn't look back until the ladder tapped the trunk like farewell. Weeks later, I returned with a small box, a letter I finally wrote, the bird's stone, a lock of hair. I eased them beneath the loosened board and left the rest closed. Some places don't hunger for flesh. They hunger for memory. I gave the grove what it asked and kept breathing above the floorboards. The swing beneath the treehouse had been moving for as long as I could remember. It swayed gently back and forth even on nights when the air was heavy and still, as if some invisible child still kicked their feet against the earth. People in town said the place was haunted, but I didn't believe in ghost stories. At least not until the night curiosity dragged me into the dark. There was something hypnotic about that swing's slow rhythm, a pendulum marking the heartbeat of a memory that refused to die. And on that night, I decided I needed to know why. The grass whispered beneath my shoes as I crossed the backyard, moonlight spilling through the trees like diluted milk. Each creak of the swing was louder now, sharp and deliberate, as if answering my approach. I paused beneath it and stared up at the empty seat, tracing the frayed ropes that disappeared into the beams of the old treehouse. My breath fogged in the cold air, though the night was warm. The swing rocked harder, and a sudden thought flickered through my mind like static. It knows I'm here. I gripped the rope and stilled it. The silence that followed was thick and strange, as though the entire grove was holding its breath. Then, from above, a single sound broke it. A soft scrape, like bare feet shifting on wood. My pulse stumbled. I tilted my head, peering into the shadowed platform above. Nothing moved, and yet the swing began to creak again, slowly, stubbornly, even though my hands still held it. That was the first moment fear sank its teeth into me. I climbed the ladder, each rung groaning under my weight. The wood felt damp and cold, as though it had been soaking up the night for years. At the top, the treehouse unfolded in ghostly fragments. The sagging roofline, the cracked boards, the faint smell of mildew and old pine. My flashlight swept across the walls and froze. Carved into the wood, fresh enough that curls of sawdust still clung to the edges, were 4 letters, JT, initials I hadn't seen since the summer of 2003. They belonged to Jacob Turner, the boy who had fallen from this treehouse and never gotten up again. A chill rippled through me. The town still spoke of Jacob in hushed tones, the way people speak of tragedies they don't fully understand. But no one had been up here in years, at least no one living. I touched the carving, and the wood beneath my fingertips felt warm, pulsing faintly, as though the tree itself had a heartbeat. That's when I heard it again, a slow, deliberate thud like footsteps circling above me. My light darted upward. The beams and rafters were empty. Each step grew heavier, closer, until they stopped just behind me. The air thickened, and a faint scent of rain-soaked earth drifted through the room. A smell I hadn't known since the day Jacob's mother wept beneath this tree. And then, near my ear, a whisper surfaced, fragile and unmistakable. "Push me." The swing below creaked once more, harder this time, as if something had just climbed onto it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was alone up there. I didn't run. Maybe it was loyalty to the child I used to be, or the way grief trains you to obey small voices. I moved to the trapdoor and listened. The swing below answered with its long creak. Above me, footsteps crossed the rafters in a circle that shouldn't exist. My flashlight jittered, strobing dust like snow. I knelt and spoke into the dark. I said the name the tree had kept, Jacob. The grove tightened, swallowing the insects. The creek paused, the ropes sighed, and the empty seat drifted toward the ladder like an apology. "Push me," the voice had asked. It sounded thin, like tape stretched one play too many. I climbed down. I didn't sit. I stood behind the plank and set my palms against the wood. My hands remembered the rhythm, the count to 3. I gave a gentle shove. The creek lengthened into a song. For a moment the yard belonged to summer, cicadas braided with a laugh I hadn't heard. But the swing answered back. With each arc the air cooled and the ropes grew damp. My palms lifted sticky, stained with amber sap. Overhead footsteps matched the tempo, heel toe, until a second cadence joined, smaller, struggling to keep up. The boards flexed as if bearing invisible knees. My light found the initials again, JT, fresh and wet. Beneath them, new strokes scored themselves into the grain, appearing in time as if cut by an unseen hand. My own initials formed under his, paired by an ampersand carved like a hook. Anger rose, at the tree, at sorrow's need for company. I caught the swing and stopped it on the forward stroke. "No," I said to the dark. "You don't get to keep me." Silence stretched taut as wire. Then the thudding above changed, no longer play but pacing. The seat tugged from my grip, though no wind moved. The rope burned my palm. Something wanted motion. Something old demanded the ritual. I made a decision that cracked like glass. I hauled the swing high, twisted the ropes until they braided upon themselves, and let go. The seat spun, cords ringing tighter and tighter, friction squealing like a trapped bird. The footsteps faltered. The floor overhead popped like a joint set wrong. The swing wound into stillness, a strangled cocoon. For a beat, the grove listened. Then the ropes split with a dry, definitive snap. The seat fell, skittered, and lay on its side, quiet as a closed book. Dawn bled through the leaves. I climbed once more and found the wall bare where the ampersand had been. Only Jacob's initials remained, old as rain. On the floor, a green cat's eye marble spun, as if deciding. I pocketed it. Not a trophy, a witness. I cut the ropes that afternoon and lowered the seat to the shed. The treehouse stayed. Some histories you dismantle, some you leave to weather you into honesty. That night, the insects sang through 817, the minute he fell without pausing. The swing doesn't move anymore. But when the air is heavy and the yard holds its breath, the marble on my desk shines like a tiny patient moon, and I know someone is still waiting for a push.
Childhood places eventually forget you.
They weather into ruins, fade into overgrowth, and stop calling your name. But when I turned down the narrow lane that led to my old backyard, it felt as though the past had been holding its breath for my return. The treehouse was still there. Same crooked ladder, same moss-veined planks, perched in the oak like a memory fossilized in bark. It should have been gone by now. 30 years of storms and seasons should have taken it apart. Instead, it looked preserved, almost reverent, like the tree itself had sworn to protect it. The closer I walked, the stronger the sensation grew that the air was heavier here, saturated with echoes of my own laughter and arguments and secrets. The rope creaked faintly, even though there was no wind. My heart quickened, that strange cocktail of nostalgia and unease pulling me toward the ladder. I placed a hand on the lowest rung and felt the wood pulse faintly beneath my palm, as if something living was buried beneath the grain. Just wood, I whispered to myself. Just wood. The inside was a time capsule. My old action figures were scattered across the floor in the same messy battle formation I'd left them. The wall still bore the carved initials, mine and my best friend's, crudely gouged into the wood. Even the half-finished drawing of a pirate ship, the one I'd abandoned midsummer when the world outside became more interesting than my imagination, was still tacked to the wall. Dust clung to everything, yet nothing felt abandoned. It felt curated, preserved, like the place had been waiting patiently for the boy who once ruled it. Then I saw the new drawings. Pinned carefully beside my childish sketches were portraits, detailed, almost eerily accurate portraits of me as I was now. My beard, my lined face, the scar above my eyebrow from a car accident 15 years ago. Dozens of them in charcoal and graphite, drawn by a hand that knew me intimately. I stepped closer, heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Whoever had made these had been here recently, maybe even today, but no one else should have known about this place. I tried to laugh it off, maybe a relative, a trespassing teenager, some bizarre coincidence. But the longer I looked, the harder it was to deny what the room seemed to be telling me. This wasn't a random discovery. This was recognition. This was memory speaking back. A sudden chill swept through the air and I turned toward the hatch. It was still open, daylight streaming through the square of sky. I took a step forward and it slammed shut with a violent thud. I froze. Silence swallowed the space, so total it felt alive. I lunged toward the trapdoor, yanking, pushing. It didn't budge. Then came the sound that rooted me to the floor, a faint scratching beneath the boards, rhythmic and deliberate, like something etching a message into the wood from below. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the floor. The scratching paused, and then slowly spelled out 4 letters I hadn't heard aloud in decades. My childhood nickname. The one only I had ever used here. Something in this house remembered me, and it didn't plan on letting me leave. I knelt there for what felt like hours, staring at the grain of the wood as if I could will it into making sense. That name, that stupid nickname I'd whispered to myself as a kid, no one else knew it. No one alive. It had been buried with my childhood, sealed inside this treehouse the day I climbed down for the last time. Yet here it was, scratched into the boards like the tree itself had been listening all along. A memory given hands. The scratching stopped, but the silence it left behind was worse. It was heavy and expectant, like the air right before a storm breaks. Then, from the far wall, I heard the faintest creak, the sound of paper shifting. One of the new drawings had fallen, but when I picked it up, I realized it wasn't new at all. It was unfinished. Only half of my face was drawn, the rest blank, as if whoever had been drawing was still waiting to see how I'd change. Waiting for me to age in real time. I backed toward the trapdoor again, forcing my shoulder against it until my muscles burned, but it didn't move an inch. It was as if the wood had fused shut. My breath turned shallow. The temperature inside was dropping. I could see my breath now in thin clouds. And then, layered beneath the groaning wood, I heard something else. A low, rhythmic heartbeat. It wasn't mine. It was deeper, older, resonating from within the tree itself. "Why now?" I whispered. "Why me?" The room seemed to respond. One by one, the portraits of me began to tremble on the walls, their edges curling as if stirred by a breeze that didn't exist. And then, as if drawn by invisible fingers, new lines began etching themselves across the blank half of the unfinished portrait in my hand. I watched, frozen as it aged me further. Deeper wrinkles, heavier eyes. Not the man I was now, but the man I would be. It wasn't remembering me. It was recording me. That's when the walls began to breathe. Not metaphorically. The planks actually swelled and sank, wood stretching and contracting like lungs pulling in air. The heartbeat grew louder. The floorboards trembled beneath my feet. This wasn't a house built into a tree. It was part of the tree, and the tree was alive. Alive and aware. A voice rose from below again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a chorus, layered and deep, speaking in a language that felt older than words. It didn't need translation. I understood it the way a dream understands itself. You are part of me. You always were. The boards beneath my hands began to soften, the wood turning warm and pliable, wrapping faintly around my fingertips. My panic spiked. I slammed my fists against the trapdoor again and again until, with a splintering crack, it finally burst open. Light flooded in, and I climbed down so fast I nearly fell, collapsing in the cold grass below. My chest heaved. The air outside felt too thin, too small for what I'd just felt pressing against my skin. But as I stumbled backward, I noticed something that turned my blood to ice. The treehouse wasn't still anymore. Its planks shifted almost imperceptibly, like a chest rising with breath. And in the bark near the ladder, new carvings had appeared. A date, tomorrow's date, and beneath it one word, return. I left town that night swearing I'd never look back. But no matter how far I drive, my dreams always end the same way, with the sound of creaking wood and the feeling of something vast and patient, still waiting for me to come home. Because some houses don't forget. They remember. And once they do, they never let go. I realize the treehouse is not a structure, but a sentient memory that has claimed them forever. Subscribe, if you dare.